She chose money, he chose her heart. But when Clint uncovered the shocking truth, everything changed. Liz, his one true love, was just part of the game, and the seductive, manipulative Cyril had her own plans. Now, Clint is faced with a choice that could change his life forever. Betrayal, revenge, and most importantly, who truly deserves his heart. Only one of them will reveal the truth. Who will it be? Find out at the end. Clint sat in the dark office, gazing at an old photo of his father lying on the desk in front of him. It was a picture from his father's 50th birthday celebration. His father stood next to his mother, both wearing the same smile that Clint had always had. Everything seemed so simple back then. He was 16, and life felt endlessly open to new possibilities. But now, after his father's death, everything seemed completely different, especially when you suddenly inherit great wealth without knowing how to handle it. The feeling wasn't what he had imagined. Instead of joy, Clint felt a weight on his soul. The funeral was quick, and his father's death left more questions than answers. His wife, Cyril, was there, as always. She tried to comfort him with words, "You're strong. Everything will be okay." But the more she spoke, the emptier Clint felt. She had always been there, but recently, he started noticing changes in her behavior. At first, he didn't pay much attention to it, but each day he felt more that something had shifted in their relationship. Cyril had always been beautiful, but lately, her appearance had changed somehow. She started dressing differently, more revealing, more luxurious. Clint noticed it, but couldn't figure out whether it was just a phase in her life, or if she was trying to change something in their relationship. He didn't understand why her changes were so noticeable after money became a part of their lives. But at first, it seemed like something insignificant. Cyril began spending money recklessly. She bought clothes she'd never had before. Expensive jewelry, new cars, furs. Clint said nothing because he knew these new purchases were the result of her desire for more. She was one step ahead. In her eyes, there was a sparkle that showed she was satisfied with what had happened. And even more, she was grateful for the opportunity to enjoy a luxurious life. But that wasn't the worst part. Her behavior changed. Now, she often went to parties with friends, attended various events, flirted with men. Clint noticed how she was getting more and more immersed in this new world. Men, luxury, fun companies. She was becoming someone else. And the more she blended into this new reality, the more Clint felt like he was outside her world. One evening, when she went out to another party, he stayed at home. His thoughts wouldn't let him rest. Looking at her phone, shared chats with friends, wondering why she was out so often, it was starting to unsettle him. Clint decided to check what was going on, without telling Cyril. He didn't know what exactly he was looking for, but he felt he wanted to know if there was any truth in her words. The phone lay on the table. He picked it up, slowly and carefully. First, he checked the messages from her party. As soon as he tapped, his gaze stopped on one of the chats. It was a photo with other men. One where Cyril was sitting on one of their laps, smiling, not looking like she did at home. If he didn't know her, he might have thought it was just a fun party. But he knew her too well not to understand that this was more than just a casual meeting. He couldn't hide his anxiety. His heart trembled. How could she? This wasn't just flirting. This was betrayal. And Clint didn't know what to do about it. At first, he decided not to say anything. Let her reveal the truth when the time came. But it wasn't that simple. She had changed. His wife, the one he once loved above all else, was now far away. It was as if she had plunged into a world where there was no place for him. And all because of the money from his father's inheritance. Clint tried to fight this thought, but what he found on her phone wouldn't let him calm down. He couldn't trust her anymore. Now everything looked completely different. He was on the brink of exposing the truth, but he felt that these words, these confessions, would change his life forever. Instead of confronting her with new questions, Clint decided to wait. He planned everything. In his heart, the question grew. What to do with this knowledge? How to get back at her? He prepared for the moment when everything would become obvious. He knew she felt her superiority, her luxury, her life on top, but he was going to bring her to the truth. And then she would understand the price to pay for betrayal. Clint stood over the phone, his fingers barely touching the screen, his gaze frozen. The photo he had seen left no doubts. Cyril wasn't just at a party. She was with another man, a man he didn't even recognize. She was sitting on his lap, laughing in a way she only laughed with those she loved. His heart trembled. Clint didn't know how to react. All those years they had spent together were precious to him, and he always thought they were just as precious to her. But now, looking at this photo, everything seemed so foreign. He placed the phone back on the table and let out a heavy sigh. Those few seconds felt like an eternity. He heard the sound of the door opening. It was Cyril. She entered the office, smiling, unaware that her husband had just discovered her secret. "Hi, darling," she said, taking off her coat and walking toward him. "Are you working here again?" Clint looked up, and his eyes locked onto her face. His gaze was firm, calm, but there was an unmistakable coldness in it. "Aren't you leaving yet?" he asked. His voice sounded as though everything around him had become unnatural. Cyril was slightly surprised by his tone, but quickly reacted. "I told you I'd be late. You don't understand how much work." She nodded toward the desk where her documents were lying. Clint didn't reply. He just sat there, looking at her. She noticed how he didn't react for a long time and nervously adjusted her hair. "What happened?" she asked, trying to hide any hint of nervousness in her voice. Clint looked away from her face and back at the photo on his phone. He couldn't stand in front of her pretending not to know. "Cyril, who is this?" He showed her the screen. Her face changed instantly. A second ago she was relaxed, but now panic reflected on her face. "It's not what you think," she started, but her words didn't sound convincing. Clint didn't say anything. He placed the phone on the table, stood up, and began pacing around the room. He didn't know what to do with this information, with this betrayal. His heart was racing, but he didn't let emotions take over. He didn't let himself explode. "You know I loved you more than anything, Cyril." His voice softened, but there was such bitterness in it that she couldn't ignore it. "I saw everything. It was so obvious." She stood still, her hands nervously clenched. She couldn't gather her thoughts, as she couldn't even imagine how Clint had found out about her betrayal. All those months when she tried to keep it a secret now seemed pointless. "Can you tell me why?" Clint stopped in front of her. "Why did you do this?" Cyril lowered her head. She couldn't look him in the eyes. "You changed," she said quietly. "Everything changed after we got this money. I started feeling different. I couldn't stay the same." Clint looked at her, trying to understand her words. Did she really mean it? Or was it just an excuse? "That doesn't justify your actions," he said. "You found someone else, and now all you're doing is trying to hide it. But I see the truth." Cyril lifted her head and looked him in the eyes. She noticed how her words began to echo in his heart. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice becoming hollow. "But I can't be with you anymore if there's no connection between us." Clint couldn't say anything. His lips trembled, but he gathered himself and walked toward the door. "I won't leave you if you don't want that," Cyril said as he stood by the door. Clint paused for a moment, not turning around. He thought about what he was feeling right now. It was pain, the pain of knowing his love was gone. But he couldn't stay with her. That was his answer. He left the room, leaving her alone. But at that moment, when he was leaving, a new person entered his life. A young, gray-haired woman named Liz, with whom he had been working for several months. She was a creative director on a new project, and Clint had noticed her long ago. But their relationship had been purely professional. Now, after leaving Cyril, his heart opened up to a new chance. Liz was different. Her gaze was deeper, her support sincere. They began spending more time together, and chemistry developed between them. One evening after an important meeting, when they stayed to work alone, Liz, slightly nervous, looked at Clint. "I don't know what will happen with us," she said, but her voice was calm and confident. Clint heard those words and felt his heart, which had not been ready for new love, begin to bloom. "I don't know either," he replied, "but I want to see where this leads us." That moment became a turning point in their lives. They didn't know where this path would lead, but it was a new beginning. Clint sat in his office, his gaze focused on the monitor screen. In his hands was a letter from a lawyer. Divorce was on the horizon, but something inside him couldn't find peace. He still couldn't understand why all this happened. Cyril had seemed so perfect, so flawless. that he couldn't even imagine that betrayal was hidden behind her smile. He had found new love, but was he ready to let go of the past? Clint sighed heavily, set the letter aside, and started texting Liz. They had grown closer, much closer than he had expected. But still, there was something in his soul that kept him tied to the past. Meanwhile, Liz, as always, approached him with ideas for a new project. She was the one who made him smile, who gave him the peace he had long lost. Clint appreciated her support, but her presence reminded him of what he couldn't forget. One evening, when they were working late, he felt the moment had come to talk about something deeper. Liz seemed to understand his intention, so she silently prepared a cup of coffee and, sitting next to him, said, "You're not the same as you were before. Something has changed." "What happened?" Clint looked up and took a deep breath. It was hard for him, but he decided to share what he had been holding inside. "I thought I found my perfect woman." His voice was quiet, almost indistinct. "I gave everything I had, but she betrayed me. I don't understand how this could have happened. And now, I don't know what to feel." Liz fell silent, her eyes deepening as if she was trying to understand what Clint was feeling. "It's very painful," she said after a pause. "But sometimes we have to realize that we can't give our whole soul to people, leaving nothing for ourselves." Clint looked at her. There was something in her words that helped him feel better. He understood that he wasn't alone in his emotions. Liz was with him not just as a colleague. She truly cared for him, and this moment became a turning point for him. Over time, they started spending more time together. At first, it was work meetings, then casual lunches and walks. And each time they were together, he felt himself drawn more and more to her. Liz wasn't just a good conversationalist. She was someone he needed. His thoughts about Cyril began to fade gradually. One evening, after they finished an important work meeting, Clint looked at Liz, who was sitting next to him, and suddenly realized that he couldn't postpone the conversation he had been avoiding for so long. "Liz, I respect you, more than anyone," he said quietly, "and I can't hide this anymore. I feel that there's something between us, more than just a working relationship." Liz looked at him, her eyes sparkling, but she didn't respond immediately. She just smiled, as if she already knew what he wanted to say. "I feel it too," she said, her voice calm and confident. "But you have to understand that your feelings for Cyril won't disappear instantly. You have time. This isn't a quick thing." Clint frowned. He understood that Liz was right. His heart wasn't fully ready for a new relationship. However, he couldn't deny what had already happened between them. He began seeing her not just as a partner, but as a woman capable of giving him what he had been looking for. "I'm ready," he said, his voice firm. "I'm ready to give this a chance." From that evening on, their relationship changed. They weren't just colleagues anymore. They started dating. At first, it was simple dinners and walks, and then they became more open with each other. Clint felt his heart start to beat again, and he trusted Liz more and more. But no matter how hard he tried to forget the past, it wouldn't leave him. One day, he received a letter from Cyril. She wrote that she wanted to talk, that she wanted to come back. And although she didn't give exact reasons for her return, Clint knew it wasn't just a coincidence. Cyril didn't want to let him go, even after everything that had happened. "What does this mean for you?" Liz asked when he shared the news with her. Clint looked at her and sighed heavily. "I don't know, but I don't want to lose what I have now." Liz took his hand and looked into his eyes. "You don't have to go back to what was, Clint. You have the right to your happiness, and if that's me, then I'll be here." Her words became the decision he had been searching for so long. He realized that the past had to stay in the past, and the future was built only with those who were ready to move forward together. Clint dialed Cyril's number, and when she picked up, he said, "Cyril, I can't go back. It's all in the past. I'll find my happiness, and I already know with whom." She was silent on the other end, but he couldn't listen to her words anymore. This was his moment, his choice, and he knew the right choice was in front of him. With Liz, he began a new life. And this time, he knew that letting go of the past was the only way to true happiness. Clint sat in the dark office, feeling as though he had fallen into the trap of his own feelings. He still remembered that night. He and Cyril, together all night. But why didn't he feel joy? Why did all the feelings he once thought were real now seem empty? It had been a few days since their reunion, which had seemed like a path to restoring their relationship, but it had opened up more questions than answers. Liz remained in his thoughts, and he couldn't understand why, after holding Cyril, she still wasn't the person she used to be. At night, Clint still couldn't find answers. Everything was mixed up. The feelings of guilt, disappointment, and fear. Was this not his last chance at real happiness? Liz was still a mystery to Clint, and he couldn't shake the feeling that there was a connection between them that they couldn't ignore. She was interesting, unpredictable, and even now, as he began being in a relationship with Cyril, thoughts about Liz stayed in his mind. She was more emotionally available than Cyril, who was increasingly absorbed by luxury and his wealth. On the other hand, Cyril understood that her life had now changed significantly. She felt on top of the world and had a sense of control. She was confident that she now had everything: money, luxury, and her husband's support. But these very changes began to tear apart her relationship with Clint. She was losing the ability to see him as a person and not just a source of wealth. She had been manipulating him, making him feel guilty for every second he doubted their future. Cyril clearly understood that her ability to control people was growing stronger with each passing day. She knew how to make Clint feel that she was the only one he needed. And, unfortunately, Clint still succumbed to her influence, even though he didn't understand why it no longer brought him any satisfaction. But every day with Liz was creating chaos inside him. If he had the option, he would simply leave Cyril and start a new life. But it wasn't that simple. The thin thread of hidden emotions, manipulations, and attachments was complicated. Clint felt that if he left Cyril, it would be an ultimate break, and at least a part of him would be left with emptiness. It was a hard reality. Recently, during one of their random meetings, Liz had accidentally mentioned that what bothered her was not only her relationship with Clint, but also some other secrets from her past. She kept them to herself because she wasn't ready to open her heart even to him. It was difficult for her because, just like him, she carried a complicated history with hidden parts of her life. That evening, Liz came to Clint and revealed something he never expected to hear. It turned out she was connected to people Clint himself knew. And these weren't just other men. This was a group of people who had long wanted to use his wealth for their own purposes. She told him that she even intended to involve him in another level of financial intrigues, but at the same time, she couldn't handle her feelings for him. She was torn between the game and the real love that seemed to have blossomed between them. Liz confessed that her connections to other people were attempts to escape the poverty of her past, but with each passing day, with every step towards him, her doubts grew. "I know I shouldn't have done this," she said, looking him in the eyes. "But I couldn't just stay away when I saw how all of this was unfolding." Clint didn't know what to say. He felt a sense of relief, but at the same time, anxiety. Now that he knew her secrets, he couldn't just brush it off. Now, faced with such a choice, his heart was racing, and his mind couldn't find the answers. Cyril had become so distant from him that sometimes he felt she was just a symbol of success, not the person he had once loved. And at the moment when Liz brought him the truth about her struggle, Clint realized that he couldn't go back. So, what now? Would he continue living with Cyril, hoping for the restoration of their past relationship, or would he plunge into a new and unpredictable world with Liz? "I have a choice," Clint said quietly, not knowing which path to take. The time had come. Clint sat in the dark cafe, his favorite place to think. He was reflecting on what he had learned about Liz, but even more, he was overwhelmed with the feeling that he didn't have enough time to fully understand it all. She had opened her soul to him, but was it the truth, or just another manipulation? And would he remain in the same cycle, where the past always cancels out the future? He didn't know what to do next. Clint couldn't dismiss his feelings for Liz, even if it meant giving up the life he had built with Cyril. Every moment with Liz became more important to him than all the luxurious dinners with Cyril. Liz had become what he feared, and yet, what gave hope for something better? However, the truth about her still needed to be fully revealed. He wasn't ready to part with Cyril. She was stubborn and strong. He had seen her world and understood what she could offer him. Still, when he thought about Liz, she seemed to be the more real connection. Her confession, her strength, and at the same time, her fear. It had become an important signal. That evening, Clint decided to talk to Liz. He knew the answers to his questions were already partially in her words, but he needed more understanding. Why was she so distant with her feelings when it was so hard for him to overcome what had been between them? Clint headed to her apartment. It was already evening, but he couldn't wait any longer. He couldn't leave this question unanswered. When Liz opened the door, Clint immediately felt that something had changed between them. Something in her gaze didn't match what it had been before. "Clint," she began, but he didn't let her finish. "Liz, why can't you be open with me? Why can't you just tell me the truth?" His voice was a bit harsh, but not dismissive. He wasn't trying to accuse her, but still wanted to figure it out. She stayed silent for a few seconds, as if gathering her thoughts. Then her gaze became firmer. "I love you, Clint, but what you think right now isn't exactly how it seems." She paused and took a breath. "There are things I can't tell you. It's not just about us. It's bigger than you can understand." Clint stayed where he was, his eyes never leaving hers. Something in her words started to confuse him. But how could this be? She loved him, but she rejected even the attempts to be honest. A sense of anxiety began to rise in his chest. What was she hiding? "What are you trying to say, Liz? You said we could be together, but something doesn't add up. You can't speak the truth. Why?" His voice softened, almost desperate. Liz seemed to be struggling with her own emotions, and then she took his hand. She leaned toward him and quietly whispered, "I can't be with you because I've lost myself. I don't want to use you to find my place in the world." Now Clint couldn't help but notice that her words were filled with pain. Was it true? And was this the moment when he should have let Liz go? But it seemed like she had already started pulling away on her own. That same evening, Clint felt that the time had come to make a final decision. He remembered Cyril. Did he really want to leave her? But nothing else seemed obvious. He felt torn between two worlds. One was full of control and manipulation, the other, unknown and painful. Could he live with this uncertainty? Now he decided to return to Cyril. Maybe that was his way, to keep the stability she offered him. And in the end, he knew he couldn't just leave everything like that. Wasn't this a test for him? But when he returned home, he saw an unexpected scene. Cyril was sitting on the couch, looking at her phone. There was a troubled look in her eyes. Clint understood something serious had happened. "You need to know, Clint," she said without looking up when he approached her. "You're not the only one with secrets." Clint froze. He felt his pulse quicken. "What do you mean?" he asked, slightly confused, trying to stay calm. She looked up, and Clint realized she didn't just say it out of a burst of emotion. There was something else in her gaze, something that made him feel fear. What else could he find out? "You'll find out soon enough, Clint," she said with a mysterious smile. "But when it happens, you won't be ready for what awaits." Clint left Cyril's apartment feeling that something had fundamentally changed. That look, that expression on her face, something was wrong. Was this really a secret she was ready to reveal? Or was it another manipulation to keep him close? He didn't know, but he felt it was time to find out, and he had no choice but to move forward. It was late when Clint arrived home. He felt like his heart wasn't in the right place. All day long, he couldn't get rid of thoughts about Liz. Why was she acting like this? Why did her words not match her actions? But tonight's evening with Cyril only added more questions and no answers. Clint sat in his chair and reached for his phone. He looked at the message from Liz again. She had written to him a few hours ago, but he didn't have the energy to respond. Why couldn't he figure out what to do? Was Liz real? Or was this just another story where his heart ended up broken? He couldn't stop himself and dialed Liz's number. His heart was racing, but he decided not to stay silent any longer. "Liz, what's going on with you?" he asked when she answered the call. Her voice seemed confused. "Clint, I don't know what to do." "You need to tell me the truth," Clint interrupted her, feeling like he had fallen into a trap of his own emotions. "You say one thing, but your actions are completely different." I love you," her voice softened, but there was still uncertainty in it. "But there's something I can't tell you, and I don't even know how to explain it." Clint felt his heart stop. "What do you mean?" he asked, slightly cooling down, trying to understand why her words didn't align with her behavior. "You'll find out very soon," Liz said, her voice growing quieter. "But Clint, don't think I'm playing with you. It's more than you can imagine. He stood there, staring at his phone, completely bewildered. She said it was more than he could imagine. What could it be? He stayed in the apartment, feeling empty inside. His thoughts returned to Cyril once again. Was she real? And could she have such a secret, the one Liz had just mentioned? But before Clint could finally decide what to do, his door suddenly opened. It was Cyril. She entered without knocking, wearing the same serious expression Clint had seen before. "We need to talk," she said, her voice calm but heavy, as if she had prepared him for something big. Clint looked up at her and felt everything around him becoming weighty. "About what?" he asked, though he already knew this wouldn't be an ordinary conversation. "You'll find out who I really am," Cyril said, approaching him, "and who we are to you." Clint stood, watching her. He didn't understand what she meant. She was resolute, and her gaze became hard again. "You need to know that I'm not just who you thought I was," she added, standing before him. "I worked for people who want to influence your life." Clint felt his heart race. He didn't know what to do. Cyril, who had seemed so real and so close to him, was actually part of something bigger. "What do you mean?" Clint asked, trying to hold back his panic. "I'm not just your partner. I work for companies that want to know more about you, your connections to Liz, and how you can influence the situation," she said with a quiet smile. "You were never my lover. You were part of the plan." Now Clint couldn't contain his shock. He didn't understand how he got into this. How could this be true? All of his feelings for her were just part of some game? How could you do this? His voice was filled with betrayal. "I don't decide, Clint." Her voice turned cold. "But now you'll know the truth about me and Liz. Everything that happened was part of the plan." Clint couldn't believe his ears. His life felt ripped from his hands, and now, as he tried to figure out who truly mattered to him, he discovered that his entire world was just a chessboard in a game that made no sense. "Now you have a choice, Clint," Cyril said, handing him her phone. "But be careful. Your decisions could have irreversible consequences. And know this, Liz has been part of this game for a long time." Clint stood before the mirror, his reflection leaving him with no doubts. He was devastated. Liz had betrayed him, and it broke his heart. But now, just when he was ready to move on, Cyril came back, and she brought with her even more questions than answers. Should he trust her? Could he really start a new life with her, knowing she too was part of this terrible game? The evening chill pierced Clint as he stepped onto the threshold of Cyril's apartment. He felt his soul scream in pain, but he couldn't let go of these emotions. How could he continue his life after discovering that everyone he trusted was part of someone else's manipulation? What next? How could he move forward when everything he held dear had now crumbled to dust? Cyril met him when he entered her apartment. She looked just like always, calm and carefree. But today, with all the knowledge Clint had gathered, her appearance only irritated him. He couldn't forget what she had said to him earlier, that he was part of the plan, not her lover. "You came," her voice sounded slightly awkward, but he didn't allow himself to feel sympathy. "I came back because I don't know what to do." His voice was dull, and he weighed every word he spoke. "You lied to me, Cyril. And now I know Liz betrayed me too." She frowned, but didn't move. "I know what you're feeling, and I can't erase your feelings. But you know yourself, it's not that simple." "Why?" he asked hoarsely, feeling his heart ache with every word. "Why were you with me?" "Why, Liz? I was ready to trust you. I thought there was something real with you." Cyril looked away, as if trying to find the right words. She knew he needed more than just explanations. But could she give him the truth he was seeking? "Do you want to know the truth?" she asked, her voice now calm but sharp. "Do you want to know everything? You already know Liz isn't who she seemed. But she was part of all this, just like me." "I realized that when I learned the truth about her," Clint replied, his voice cold, but filled with pain. "But why did all this happen? Do you want me to be part of this plan?" Cyril sighed. She knew he wanted more than just vague phrases. But the truth was complicated, and she wasn't sure Clint was ready for it. "It all started when you found out about me," she began. "I didn't want to drag you into this, but I couldn't tell you why you became the object of this game. You're important, Clint, but not in the way you think." "What do you mean?" he asked, His heart began to race. He was ready for any truth, even if it shattered him into pieces. You're part of a bigger plan, one that involves you, Liz, and even me. This isn't just manipulation, it's a calculated move with a result. And we're all here, on the political chessboard, where each of us has our role. Clint froze. His head was overwhelmed with thoughts, but he couldn't organize them. Was he part of something bigger? What role did Liz play in all this? And did he even have a place in these plans? How did this even happen? His voice was barely audible. Why me? Because you have what we need. You're the one with influence, and your role isn't over yet, Cyril said, looking away. I can't stop this, Clint. I was involved too. But I can tell you one thing. All our decisions have already been made. And now, you have a choice. I don't want to be part of this game. Clint exclaimed, his voice now firm. Cyril looked at him with disdain, but there was no aggression in her eyes, only sadness. She understood that he had the right to refuse, but it wouldn't change what had already happened. You can't back out now, Clint. You're already too deep in this, and now the question is whether you want to use it to your advantage. Clint didn't respond. His heart was filled with anger, pain, and disappointment. He didn't know if he could trust even himself anymore. What happens next? He asked, unable to believe he was saying it. Now it's your choice, Cyril said, slowly approaching him. You can walk away from this game and move on, or you can use your role. The choice is yours. But before Clint could respond, his phone rang sharply. He looked at the screen. It was a message from Liz. I know you found out the truth, but I had no choice. You don't yet know who's really behind all of this. Clint stood there, staring at the message, feeling his world crumble around him. Clint stood in front of the phone, like he was in the crosshairs. The message from Liz glowed on the screen, and his heart tightened with anxiety. I had no choice. You don't yet know who's really behind all of this. His thoughts raced, and he felt something dark and deep was about to be revealed, changing everything he had grown used to. Clint read the message several times, trying to understand what Liz's message meant. Who was behind all of this? Why had she been forced to do this? And was there any truth in it at all? Cyril, standing nearby, noticed his confusion but didn't say a word. She was waiting for him to find the answer himself. What does this mean? His voice was strained, and he looked at Cyril, who was now standing, gazing at him with a serious expression. This is just the beginning, Clint, she replied, her eyes never leaving his. You have to understand that your life has long been a part of a bigger plan. Liz and I, we're just pieces in this game. Clint sighed heavily. His mind couldn't process all of these facts at once. Everything he had thought about his relationship had shattered. Who could he trust? And was there even a place for him in this world, where everyone was acting according to their own plans rather than their feelings? Why didn't you tell me earlier? Clint asked, not knowing what exactly he wanted to hear from Cyril. She tilted her head as if thinking about the best way to respond. Because it would have been harder for you to understand. Because I didn't know if I could trust you. And because I was also part of this plan. Now her words sounded even more ominous. Everything Clint had thought seemed like just a game. A chessboard where every move was predetermined. And Liz? He asked, his voice barely audible. Why? She wasn't free, Cyril interrupted. She's part of something bigger too. And I know she deceived you, but she wasn't the only one who was forced to take certain steps. I don't understand, Cyril, Clint said, feeling his heart break with uncertainty. Are you saying I'm just part of a game controlled by others? She nodded, slowly approaching him, her eyes now softer. Yes, but you have a choice. You can run and try to rebuild your life, or you can stay and play this game, using your power. But before Clint could say anything, his phone rang again. It was a message from Liz. You need to know more before you make your choice. I can help you understand why this is all happening. Clint stared at the message, and his soul was in turmoil. What was he supposed to do next? He felt how hard it was to stay in the middle of this chaos. His mind was filled with thoughts, but one thing was clear. He had to make a choice. And that choice wouldn't be easy. Why me? He asked, turning back to Cyril, his voice quiet but determined. Why am I in all of this? I didn't do anything. You didn't do anything wrong, Clint, Cyril said, her voice softer than he expected. You're an important part of this, and sometimes we can't control where life leads us. The choice you make now will determine your future. But Clint wasn't sure. His heart ached, and he felt that even if he decided to leave it all behind, it wouldn't be that simple. He still needed to understand what all of this meant, and what would happen to him next. Liz has something important to tell me, Clint finally spoke, looking at Cyril. But can I trust her? And do I even have the right to trust anyone in all of this? Cyril paused for a moment and then said, You have the right to everything, but right now, it's up to you to decide who you want to be. You can accept your role in this game, or walk away and forget about it all. Clint sighed heavily. Everything he thought had changed. Liz, Cyril, the whole situation. He didn't know what to do with it. But now he knew one thing for sure. He needed to meet with Liz and learn the truth. And only after that would he understand if he would remain part of this game. I'm going, he said, more determined now. I need to talk to her. Cyril looked at him, a heavy shadow of contemplation crossing her face. Be careful, Clint. And remember, everything you find out will affect your future decisions. Clint left Cyril's apartment, feeling his heart constrict with fear and pain. But he knew that the path to the truth was the only right decision. Whatever that truth might be, he couldn't leave his questions unanswered. Clint stood at Liz's door. She had called him only a few minutes ago, once again throwing him off balance with her messages. You need to know the truth, and I have to explain everything to you. Clint couldn't understand what was going on. Why had everything become so complicated? What was he supposed to do now? Clint stood before Liz's door, nervously staring at the digits on his phone screen. He pressed the doorbell, but the seconds felt like hours. Liz was still a mystery to him. Her words, her promises, he couldn't figure out where the truth ended and the lies began. And most importantly, why did she want to meet with him again after he had learned that she had betrayed him? The door opened, and Liz stood before him, her eyes showing something new, something he had never seen before. She was calm, but inside him, something heavy stirred, as if she was trying to hide something. Clint, her voice was quiet but firm. You need to understand everything. I'm not who I seem to be. He stared at her, his mind full of questions. What was happening? Why had she betrayed him? And why did she want to meet now, after all these years, when he had believed that everything that had happened was just part of their story? What do you want to tell me? Clint asked, his voice calm but tinged with nervousness. What do you mean? Liz invited him inside, and they sat at the table. She didn't rush to answer, remaining silent for a few minutes before looking at him with a serious expression. You have no idea how hard it was for me to keep all of this inside, she began. But I had to. It's all part of something much bigger, and I couldn't let you get caught up in it. What do you mean? Clint felt like everything was slipping out of control. Liz looked him in the eye and said frankly, I was forced to work for someone. All these years, I wasn't with you just like that. It was part of the plan. Clint grabbed the chair as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I couldn't, she looked away. I couldn't tell you because it would have been dangerous. You were already involved in all of this. His heart started racing. What did she mean? He couldn't process all of this at once. What are you talking about? Clint's voice was barely a whisper. I was involved in this game long before you came into my life, Liz spoke slowly. You're part of a big political conspiracy, and I had to act to get you involved. I'm sorry, Clint, but it was all necessary to finish everything. Now Clint couldn't believe his ears. He sighed deeply and lowered his head. And you kept all of this from me? I couldn't do it any other way, she said. You weren't ready, but now I realize you have the right to know. Suddenly, the phone rang. Clint looked at the screen and saw that it was Cyril. His heart skipped a few beats, and he immediately answered. Clint, we need to talk. Have you figured everything out? Cyril asked in a tone that sent a chill down his spine. What is this game? Clint couldn't hold back. I want to know the truth. Liz says it's all part of some bigger game. Do you know anything about this? I know more than you think, Cyril replied, her voice cold. And I think you'll understand that your choices won't be yours anymore. But you have a choice. Leave everything behind, or become part of this world where there is only the game and no rules. Clint felt like he couldn't breathe. Everything he had been striving for now seemed so distant. Was there a way back to normal life after learning all this truth? He looked at Liz again, but in her eyes, he didn't see calmness or remorse. He turned off the phone and faced her. I don't know who I can trust. His voice was quiet and tired. But maybe this is the best moment for me to make a choice. Are you saying you'll choose me? Liz looked incredibly calm, but her eyes still revealed confusion. I don't know, Clint replied, but I want to start with what I know. And suddenly, just as he thought everything was decided, and he felt his heart breaking into pieces, Liz took the next step that silenced him. She came closer, and her kiss was so deep that all words dissolved into the air. Clint didn't know if he would ever be able to make the final choice. But right now, he felt his mind sinking again into an ocean of doubts and emotions. Clint walked out of Liz's apartment, not understanding why his heart was beating so fast. Now that he knew everything, he had trouble deciding what to do next. Liz's and Cyril's words rang in his head, crossing and mixing, leaving only chaos. Under Clint's feet, he felt the ground shaking, although he stood on the usual sidewalk. The city, which had seemed such a normal part of life, suddenly felt foreign. One question kept spinning in his mind. How did he end up in this situation? He had Liz, the woman who seemed to be his world. And there was Cyril, seductive, manipulative, mysterious. But now everything had become so tangled that he couldn't even say whom he could really trust. The door of Liz's apartment closed behind him, and he took a few steps, clutching his phone in his hand. He was already ready to dial her number when he suddenly heard the echo of Cyril's voice in the receiver. She was calling again. He didn't know what she could say to him this time, but he understood that there was no way to refuse the conversation. Clint, her voice sounded in his head, as if he couldn't escape her web. You don't understand what happened. You're already in this game, and you can't just walk away. Right now, you, like me, are standing on the edge. I don't want to be part of your game. His words were firm, but his heart was still pounding wildly in his chest. But you're already in the game, and, I can be your ally or your enemy. It depends entirely on you. Liz is not who you think she is. Cyril's words hit him painfully, like cutting into his soul. How could that be? How could you not trust the person you spent so much time with? Meanwhile, Clint couldn't take his eyes off Liz. Her face in his memory was still pure, untarnished. But it turned out that she was part of this complicated and dangerous game. He knew the time had come to make his choice. It wasn't an easy decision. So he went back to Cyril's apartment, where she was already waiting. She sat on the bed, looking at him as if she understood what would happen next. You've come. Her smile was barely noticeable, but full of determination. Now we can finish this. I have to make a choice, don't I? Clint asked. Yes. She stood up, and every movement she made was filled with commanding energy. You choose whether to leave things as they are or join me. He looked at her, then at the window, where the night was growing darker. Liz's words kept replaying in his mind. Her face, what she had said. The more he thought, the more he felt these two worlds couldn't come together. But I can't leave you without knowing the truth, Clint said, turning back to Cyril. Her face grew serious. She knew what he meant. I'll tell you the truth, Clint, but I can't guarantee it'll give you an answer. At that moment, just when he thought he was ready for anything, Clint received a message on his phone. It was from Liz. The text was short, but clear. I'm sorry, Clint. I've lived with you all these years, but I can't do this anymore. You've learned who I am, and now you have to make a choice. Clint couldn't believe his eyes. It was like a hammer blow. She decided to let him go? Or was this another manipulation? He looked at Cyril, but her gaze didn't change. She knew Liz had done this on purpose to put him in a position to choose. What will you do now? Cyril asked, standing right in front of him. She was ready for any decision. Clint looked at the phone and replied, I'll stay here, but I'm not ready to choose between you two yet. And with those words, he felt that his life, without him realizing it, had already changed. Who do you think deserves a chance in Clint's life, Liz or Cyril?